Single TV channel 250. Please, I want to remind you to please download the applications of Single TV on their respective stores in iOS and Android. Remember that the application is totally free, so there is no reason why not to download it and enjoy it. Enjoy the programming that Spanglish World has to offer to you. Multitude of programming from entertainment to politics to sports. We have it all under one umbrella. I also want to remind you that Single TV can be found on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire and Amazon Fire TV Sticks, Roku and Roku Sticks, and on all smart TVs 2016 and forward. In your screen, you see my co-host and my great friend, Toronto's probably #1 podcaster and now TV host of the new show on the Spanglish World Network, the Whiskey and Cream Show that debuted yesterday. Go to our website. You can go and replay it and download it to see the greatest and best podcasting that you can see in this city, in this country. Ari, welcome to the show.
Ed, always a pleasure to meet with you on Saturday mornings and have you talk about me so highly. It's just, it's perfect for my ego. There's nothing quite like being told all these things that you love telling the viewers about me. I really appreciate it. I thought last night's show was very enlightening for a lot of your viewers, I'm sure, because it was for me when you start talking about what's going on with hockey. So it was a hell of a way to start our experience working together.
Well, I enjoyed the show. Actually, I produced your show yesterday, and I deeply enjoyed the conversation between all your guests that you had. Very knowledgeable group of people from.
Aren't they? Weren't they something? I'll tell you something. What I'm starting to appreciate as I get older in my life, especially with social media being the way it is just what an opportunity it is for virtually anyone who's passionate about sports to become real authorities on it through a combination of studying and reading up and understanding the analytics and the history of the sport. It's a hell of a time in that regard. I think people really underestimate it, don't you think, Ed, when it comes to what the value of knowledge can mean for someone who doesn't understand the sport?
Oh, 100%. I mean, there is so much information in the. If you remember when we first started this business, you actually had to go to the library and dig little films and squares and here and there to try to decipher and read the stories in the newspapers. So this idea that you can have everything at the access of your fingertips is amazing. So you don't have to travel. I used to remember having a pile of books of different media guides that I would go through the pages to see what did you do that time. And now it's everything at your fingertips.
The days of libraries and going out and having to research and studying things on, using pen and paper. Obviously, you get to this point now where we live in such a modern era that is distributing information so fast and furiously. And that's why authorities or people who can speak on subjects who've taken the time to research it are so coveted now. It's not merely, obviously, as simple as knowing something. It's how you express it. It's how you communicate it. And I think we've entered a golden age of genuine point-to-point human communication where somebody can project themselves, start a debate, start a discussion, put it on social media, use YouTube to promote it, use Twitter, use Instagram and Facebook. And the next thing you know, you have a gathering of people around like a fireside chat listening very passionately, attentively and understanding what that value is. I remember years ago, back in the days here in Toronto, where we had Lone Star cafes, which were like these great Tex-Mex places where people could meet each other and have drink and enjoy nachos and beers. And it was a couple of friends of mine. We were talking about maybe it was the Toronto Maple Leafs or the Montreal Canadiens. And next thing we knew, we had about a dozen people from surrounding tables, neighboring tables, leering in, smiling, listening, making their thoughts clear that they were really enjoying the conversation because it was offering them something that they didn't consider. Or maybe it was just the exuberance of it all. Regardless, what I enjoy about doing Whiskey and Cream is that it gives me a chance to bring together like-minded people and those who are passionate about, for example, whether it's sports or politics or music or film. And then you get to see them at their most genuine, their most authentic. Their opinions come straight from inside. They're not overly processed or just, thrown about sound bites. Hate those, man. Got no patience for the sound bites.
Oh, for sure. No, it's a different age. Like I was saying, I remember when I was just starting in this business, that my resource was the baseball almanac and the NFL books, the red book, the yellow book, the black book. I don't remember. They had all the colors that under the sky, and you sat in cafes, in restaurants with the books and and your pen and paper, digging out numbers so that when you
Yeah,
to the stadium and try to do a story, you had all everything. Now it's so different, but it makes it interesting because people like you and me that we went through the old times and we are in the new era. uh, we can really diversify our potential of what we can do and how we can transmit this information to the general public out at large.
that's well said. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's about putting stock in yourself, isn't it? Right?
Yeah,
I think it's about recognizing that if you have something to offer using social media, using technology to again project yourself, project your point of view, project your passion, and you can do it convincingly, you can do it um, being very articulate and getting succinct and to the point while entertaining at the same time. What captivates our attention these days, right? The attention span of the average person is what, 8 seconds, scientifically proven. Like to get someone's attention is hard enough, but to keep it by being authentic and passionate about what you're doing, that's what creates these fan bases. That's what allows, for example, comedians to be successful in the modern age, right? That whole industry has changed. They've gone through their own seismic shifts of how you can be successful in that industry. And today, who are the most successful comedians? Well, they're the ones who are going out and monetizing their own fan base by offering something unique on social media that people are willing to put their time and effort to enjoy, to spend money to get, right? It's no different than a service like the Athletic provides. They have an elite publication that offers valuable information by pedigreed journalists. In order to get that, you have to pay. I think the difference now is that people more than ever, because they're staying home and battling the coronavirus the way they are, they want options, they want variety, they want passion, and they'll go to great lengths to find it. And for example, your followers of your network, the reason you have these followers is they're very passionate about what you're doing. It's a mutual passion there. They love listening and watching you. You love projecting and performing for them.
I appreciate that. No, but you know what? I don't want to discard the new generation of reporters that are out there because they are very analytical. They are very task oriented. There is great personalities in the Toronto media right now.
Absolutely.
You have Laura Armstrong, you have Mark Polinsky, guys that are from this generation, but that bring a different type of news, different type of opinion on how the game is played now to what it was played before.
Absolutely. And there really are only two types of sports journalists now in this market or in any self-respecting North American media market. And that is the journalist who is simply out there to perform a job, a task, is hired to be a means to an end, and they just simply fulfill that like mercenaries, or the journalist who actually takes pride in what makes them so unique, whether it's their approach to how they write, right? It might be a unique prose that they use. It could be their methodology, how they approach their success with interviewing players, or the way in which they host and project themselves on YouTube. If you put stock in yourself, like I said, then what people begin to see is that they appreciate what you're doing because it's you, as opposed to just simply being like so many other journalists out there who just regurgitate information, right? A unique journalist is someone who understands what their strength is and they cater to it. They don't waste their time trying to be like everyone else. They put their energy and time and effort. I think you mentioned Laura Armstrong, right?
Yeah.
I've interviewed her on multiple occasions, and she is a great example that you use as a journalist of a younger generation who appeals to older generations because of the credibility of her work. As simple as that. Like I'm solidly smack in the Gen X camp, right? Which means I spent most of my adult life trying to validate myself to baby boomers and yet have millennials relate to what I do. And when I'm able to do both, then I know I'm being self aware of how I can put stock in myself to be a journalist and be successful. I wish more journalists would do that rather than just run around like lemmings off a cliff, retweeting half baked, disingenuous information like a couple of weeks ago. It happens to the best of them. Hazel May got caught in that trap. She announced information that was false. You know what I'm talking about? It was that
Yeah.
trade that never happened. And, that's an example of how journalists get so carried away in the moment of trying to be successful that they forget that it's all about their unique skills. That's what makes them successful, is their unique incremental contribution. And we've had journalists like that in this market, and we do. It's just right now, many of them are being fired by the duopolies, and it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing how much great talent has been thrown asunder because of these, cost-cutting measures during the
Yeah.
worst time.
And uh, with in that note, I wanted to really bring up of the Toronto Star. And congratulations on hiring Mike, because Mike, although he left the Pan 590 and the great work that he was doing there behind the mic every single game for the Toronto Blue Jays, he's a great baseball mind that now can enlighten you through his writing in getting everything to you.
Well, and Mike Wilner, Mike Wilner is interesting because he's from my generation. And I have listened to him for as long as I've paid attention to the Toronto Blue Jays from the day that he joined them, right? He was brought on as someone who needed to learn from the greats, which he did because they had exposure to Tom and Jerry. I mean, when you have Tom Cheek and Jerry Howarth as your radio mentors or role models that you can emulate, things are going to work out well for you. And they did. They worked out for him because I thought the work that he did on Jay's Talk was fantastic. The post-game show where he took telephone calls and turned into like the Dr. Laura Schlesinger of baseball and that's exactly what he was, by the way, because he'd get people calling him up who were drunk and people who were berating him. Sometimes he'd get prank calls, but he took it with grace and he ran a great, entertaining show. And then he became the voice of the team. And then I guess he made too much money, right? I mean, that's the simple equation with some businesses, is that you can get a little bit too big for your britches. But I'm glad that he's, back in the game. I wish he would have been a little bit more humble. He came back and he announced it as a kind of defiance to his previous employer. That's not such a bad thing either, to see that kind of spill out in the public realm. I mean, look, it's a social media era, so those kind of that kind of drama and that kind of melodrama is what it is really, is going to happen. But it goes to your point, Ed, that there's a lot of talent out there that was sliced and diced by corporations because of circumstances that they could justify. As a result, I think it's created a renaissance on YouTube and on podcasting avenues for great. I mean, who did I interview the other day on my show? It was Steve Warren. He hosted that TSN morning radio show for like 20 years. What a golden voice, what a lustrous voice. I interviewed him. I've got a new show coming up on the audio side with John Derringer from Q107. We had a great conversation, and he's a recognizable talent and voice. You have to adapt in this new reality. They call it the gig economy, and it's completely converted to a digital reality that we live in. You have to adapt, but you should never lose confidence in yourself. If you feel you have a talent that you can export and that you can exercise to help be successful financially, you should do it. If you take shortcuts and exploit yourself by sensationalizing yourself, well, that's usually where a lot of people get into trouble, and it becomes like a rat race mentality. But there are great young journalists who I have had a chance to speak to, who've gone to Humber College, who've gone to the College of Sports Radio Media, downtown, who've gone to Ryerson, who've attended Carleton for journalism. I applaud them for hanging in there. What a tough industry to get into, right, Ed? I mean, this is probably the
It's
most difficult time you could try to be a journalist. But if you're authentic and you're passionate, my God, the things you can do.
oh no, definitely. I mean, this industry is not the easiest one to get into, and if you don't do the due diligence of being persistent, you are going to get awful. But this is what the world and Spanglish world and the current network we are trying to do. Give that opportunity to those newcomers into the industry that want to gain their experience. And as I always say, I don't mind being the stepping stone for progressing careers, but those kids need the opportunity to get the experience, to get the modulation on radio, to get the modulation on TV through through video podcasting or through radio podcasting. Because if they don't do that and get their brand out there, they'll disappear into the infinity. And this is what we're here for. I mean, guys, we have been through this industry back and forth many times, uh, that persist on the idea of putting those people in front of the mic, in front of the TV, of the camera. That's what it's all about. It's a difficult industry, a difficult game to play, but someone has to do it.
I guess when you use the expression disappearing into infinity, it really illustrates the magnitude of just how serious a challenge it is, right? I agree with that. I agree with everything you just said. I think it's pitiful that the industry, sports journalism as an industry, um, really shot itself in the foot because there was no reason for them to have to go to subscription based models if they would have monetized their advertising properly. And by the way, advertising marketing, that facet of life has been a challenge for half a century in North American mentality. Like, how do we promote ourselves so people will want to buy our products or subscribe to our services? The sports world struggled mightily when it came to magazines and newspapers because of the changing technology, and they all became very elitist because they were now all driven by the clickbait mentality, right? I think that's the biggest challenge we have right now, is how to separate the clickbait white noise garbage versus the really great genuine journalism without necessarily having to pay for it. And because now you can only get it by paying for it, right? Like, you're not going to be able to read the New York Times or enjoy the Athletic unless at some point you start spending money. And I think that's positively sad because it didn't have to go in that direction. It could have been something where if the old media empires had marketed themselves properly and shown value for their work. I mean, look, back in the day, I bought the Globe and Mail and the Toronto Star newspapers because I thought it was valuable for me. 75 cents, a buck, whatever. Problem now is it's like $4. So you're not going to buy newspapers anymore, even though it's kind of cool once in a while to just grab a newspaper, isn't it, and have a croissant and just kind of read and say to yourself, cool, I feel like it's 1994 again. It's a tough business now because it's become so ruthless and profit driven. And for young talent starting out, and there's some great talented people out there who've got amazing ideas, but they're not getting the opportunity, right, to showcase what they can do. One of the reasons I became an independent publisher and I'm on the outside looking in, and I've never affiliated myself with these big corporations when it comes to journalism, is because I think they disrespect talent. It's simple as that, Ed. They disrespect talent because they look at it as purely a means to an end as opposed to an investment. And I've always been of the belief, right, that the reason that you invest in a person is because they're at a stage where there's an opportunity for them to grow into the talent that they deserve to shine and be for the world. And there used to be a time when, you would have these newspaper companies that would like hire somebody because they were brilliant and then cultivate him or her and give them a chance to do interviews. And the next thing you know, you've got your next Barbara Walters. And that's what's frustrating. If you looked at the different affiliates and news outlets, a lot of people are just doing pylon based jobs. They're not really driving the narrative. They're just kind of consolidating it because they're picking it up off of social media. Who needs that, right? I mean, real talent searches for new narratives, new directions, and brings it out. And then you can tell stories. And that's, to me, the opportunity of how you put stock in yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible to see that, and 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 they unite too, because you have the news media that is trying now to control who who tells the story, uh, by owning the teams, by owning, in the case of MLC, let's be frank, it's owned by
Be
Bell.
blunt.
It's owned by Bell Media and Rogers Communications. So now the narrative is, if you don't belong to us, you shouldn't be at the game.
Absolutely.
Tell the
There's no
story.
great point. There's no sense of cooperation. Like once upon a time, you could collaborate with other journalists from different, almost like a squad of investigators getting down to the heart of the story. Um, you used Bell Media as an example. It didn't have to be that way. I'd like to think that one of the reasons that they morphed into their mentality that they have towards sports journalists today is because they didn't have enough talented or intelligent people at the top to properly understand that, look, we're living in one of the biggest cities in the world. This market is huge. It's expanding. Our real estate prices are bubbling. It's clear that we're not decaying anytime soon. So there are millions of people who, in their efforts to deal with this pandemic, are turning to sports. And by the way, this is like the perfect time to do it in Toronto, isn't it? I mean, this is surreal. We have a real conflux of not one, not two, but three teams on the professional scale that you can totally respect. The Raptors hit 500 yesterday after their horrible start. Do you remember 4.5 weeks ago how people were like ready to jump off
Yeah,
the Bloor Viaduct there? There was like a sense of dread, like, oh no, what's going on here? Well, look, guess what? It's a great team that's morphing into something better. Then you've got the Blue Jays who are prepping for what should be an extremely volatile major league season because of what's going on down south. But you've got this team with an exciting nucleus that just made a big move in the offseason, and everyone's talking Blue Jays again, and everyone's like ignoring the fact that Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins at first nearly drove them into the ground. And then in the third case, you've got the Toronto Maple Leafs who are literally poised for what is probably their best shot to win a Stanley Cup championship since 1967. So there should be no shortage of men and women coming up in the industry who are excited about this and have something to offer. I had three of them on this network yesterday when we did the show because and what do they all share in common? They're all three of them millennials, number one. All three of them at some point either worked for Bell Media or Rogers or some other, big telco. And all three of them are doing interesting side gigs or hustles, as they say, where they're trying new podcasts or writing for different online publications or trying to get involved with grassroots businesses. I love that. That to me gives me some faith that the future, whatever it may be, if you're going to have this kind of resiliency and industriousness, only good things are going to happen. That's the kind of stuff that when you tell me that you enjoy helping furthering other people's careers, that's precisely what that's evidence of how you feel afterwards, because these are humble people, and there's got to be humility, because I have no room for the arrogance of certain writers I could easily name off right now in the Toronto market whose elitism hurt them because they felt they were self-righteous and hoity-toity in what they provided. Well, guess what? You're not that hot. There are other alternatives for people to get their information on sports. They're just not being given a chance. So you see what I'm saying? There's this battle between grassroots resiliency and these gatekeepers at the top who've really put their foot down on the necks of ambition when it comes to young talent.
yeah. I mean, let's put it this way. I remember, and I'm going to touch again on the terms of what MLSC and Rogers and Bell have done, and uh, in terms, controlling how the story is told, because it's not correct. In the olden days, and let's go back to the Toronto Front Media publishings, before they were bought by Quebecor, uh, and how bad it was that, you know uh, you would go to a playoff series or a World Series event for the Toronto Blue Jays, and you had 20 different writers from a publication taking spots away from people that truly wanted to earn a living, doing what they love to do, following their passion. And now you have that in Rogers Bell with MLSC and with the Toronto Blue Jays. If you are not one of them and you are going to narrate the story they want to be narrated without criticism, then you are not welcome. And that's not journalism. Journalism is about learn to accept constructive criticism about what you are doing to get it better, to get a product better. And that's what journalism is about.
Well, and especially with the kind of history that exists in Toronto, right? I mean, there have been some really incendiary types, you know. They're called mostly contrarians these days, but they were true rabble rousers like the Steve Simmons and the Cahal Kellys and the Damian Coxes. When they started up in their careers in this market, it was no holds barred. And it was true journalism because if the team wasn't playing well, believe you me, they got down to the brass tacks as to why. And they didn't pull any punches. And unfortunately, it created almost a cynicism on the hockey side because, look, when you go 54 years without a championship, you're going to go a little bit cuckoo. Like you're going to go crazy. Something in your psyche as a fan that if you're into like your fifth decade of following this team, you just don't care about it anymore. You just kind of wait and see, and if they do something great, you feed off it. But those journalists did a great job of holding the teams and the organizations responsible for their mediocrity. And you've got to do that. You can't get better as an organization until the journalism around you forces you to get better. Because think about it, like you said, if everyone's towing the party line and you're being told at the top that you've got to make sure that you always create this perception that everything's hunky-dory even though it isn't, then you get delusional. You get what's known as a delusional fan base. And I think that's exactly, what happened with Blue Jays and Maple Leafs fans over various points. This really is a renaissance because they're going to get a reprieve, and maybe it'll actually help journalists and inspire more people to get into the industry. All three teams have reasons to keep you legitimately inspired while the rest of the world is struggling. And really, what more do you want than to have a legitimate sense of escapism because your team is promising and exciting. Leafs, like I said, 4-on-4, this team is just disturbingly powerful with the talent they have. And the Jays, if everyone's healthy and they get the kind of performances that they're projecting are going to be, they're going to be a team that hits really well. And that's exciting in baseball, where you feel like you could win every game by outslugging the opposition, which you're familiar with because you lived through the early 90s era. And with the Raptors, they're just such a first-class organization. After what Masai endured with the Golden State victory in that lawsuit and the way that Nick Nurse has dealt with a really difficult start to the season, I always feel like I have to go into automatic complimentary mode with that organization because I absolutely adore them. I think they're absolutely fantastic and exactly what this market needed in a basketball team because of its multicultural value and its the way it captures its imagination as a game. So the opportunities are there. It's just, if you're not going to have businesses who are offering the chance for somebody to get started and they're incredibly excited, it's a shame. It's like you said, it disappears into infinity. They go off and they end up working for an accounting firm, or they end up becoming a lawyer, or they end up becoming a teacher. They never fulfill their potential, which is what they really want to be, which is this force for the written and spoken word.
So, since you touched the Raptors, let's talk Raptor basketball right now, because you mentioned Masai Ujiri, and we know Masai Ujiri is in the last year of his contract with the Raptors. We don't know where that's going to go. We know that Mr. Webster was given an extension on his deal, but then Mr. Webster, and I hate to say this, but PM, I am sorry. He's like, he had the best job in the world because it's only the president talking and everyone else shuts up. So it's the best GM position you can have with the Toronto Raptors because
Yeah,
was all the talking and you just sit and watch and say what he said.
that's it. That's it. And like you pointed out, every organization gets its respect and credibility from the person at the top, right? The man or woman who stands up and makes the final decision. And Ujiri has shown in his time with the Raptors that he's literally done the equivalent of walking on water when it comes to bringing respect and leadership and conviction and values to a professional sports team. And what people don't seem to understand is that most pro sports teams talk a good game about how they want to be perceived, but they're nowhere near the kind of standard of excellence that they think they espouse. And you know what I mean? Not just we're profitable and we're successful and we've got a good culture and we respect diversity, not just all those things, but in its essence, how it carries itself. You know, I was speaking with someone the other day about how that series with Golden State when they won the championship really could have gotten off the rails if Kyle Lowry had lost his composure when he'd been pushed by that idiot in the front row who ended up being a minority shareholder. Do you remember that infamous
Yeah.
moment where it was so appalling? And then after what happened to Masai at the end when they won and with the deputy lawsuit, you understand how life becomes not the damage that's caused from people who light the fuse, but the damage that can be brought upon themselves when they don't react properly to it. And this organization is so cool and poised, and they've always put it on display. They don't lose their heads. And what's fascinating to me is that if Masai goes to greener, or whatever the interpretation of greener pastures are, I mean, think about it. He's the most respected executive in the land. He's won a championship. I'm sure money's not the issue. So it would really take something exceptional for him to leave the Raptors as an organization. And if they were to lose him, as painful as it would be, it wouldn't surprise me because he's probably maybe ready for new challenges. And we've seen leaders that have been brought in and it just didn't work out in the past. And we held on to them too long. In his case, I think the city wants to hold on a little bit longer. They look at Siakam and his progress and the raw talent that is Anunoby, and they say to themselves, Fred Van Vliet has arrived. And suddenly, retooling the Raptors to become a contending team again is not an issue. It's a question of whether or not Masai wants to go to some other market that hasn't won in quite some time and try to be their savior. That's what happened with Pat Gillick, right? Once Pat Gillick reached the top of the mountain, there wasn't a greater height for him to climb, which was a real shame because when he left, that was when the decline of the Blue Jays as an organization began. What did we start noticing? Number one, the values, the leadership, the diversity, all of that went out the window. I mean, for crying out loud, they turned into you can analyze it objectively and pinpoint the moment where the Blue Jays lost their soul that they had generated with the fans as a baseball force in the city. And they've never gotten it back. And you can romanticize what's happening with the current regime all you want. This is nowhere near the kind of organization that I grew up enjoying. And the Raptors are living that. They're a reflection of how I felt in the 80s and 90s looking at the baseball side of things. And to get that in a sport that appeals to so many different people, so many different cultures, so many different walks of life, it's incalculable to figure out the magic that he's done. And so you and I both know that if our good friend Pat Gillick could find a way to do it and eventually leave it gracefully, it won't surprise me if that happens with Masai as well.
The, and you brought a good point because there is certain people keep organizations going. And we had the opportunity to have Pat stay in Toronto for forever, because if you remember correctly, he had a investment group that he formed to try to buy the Toronto Blue Jays when Rogers purchased the Jays, and for some odd reason they just Labatt didn't budge or Interbrew didn't budge with that. Each were money.
Isn't it interesting? It doesn't matter who ends up buying you, I think. I mean, we put a lot of stock into the types of companies that own organizations. I mean, the criticism, for example, that Rogers and Bell, they own the sports teams and therefore they can control the message. But you know what else they can control, Ed? They can go out and get quality people. They can go out and get real leaders. They don't. You see, I hate this notion that we should simply blame all the travails and problems on an unseen corporate entity. Yeah, that goes without saying. There's a reason why the team is in the shape that it was at one point because of the corporate entity. But good baseball people or good basketball people create good opportunities for fans to
Oh,
enjoy the sport.
no, and I'm not saying that it doesn't, but the where I see the problem with Rogers, particularly, is that the Jays need a baseball mind at its front, and they had a baseball mind at the front of the organization on Paul Beeston. And there's another role that we can discuss when it comes to what makes him Toronto to go to the commissioner's office for a while. Came back to Toronto, and he's still doing the great. And he's still involved. He's the, let's say, the messenger between the team and the ownership, and he gives advice. But you know, there is certain people that understand their industry and understand the fan base, and that's what you need at the helm of an organization. And and I wrote a story about 3 years ago uh, for La Portada Canadá, the Spanish newspaper, in which when after just after Ross Atkins and Mark Shapiro arrived in this town, and the picture that it had, it was a picture of Skydome with a black cloud over top, because it's not that I don't like them. I don't like the way they do business.
No,
Uh, they,
you're,
they dismantle teams
that's
to
right.
basis.
A dismantling that there's a real sad psychology to how they dismantled it as well, because it was justified in so many different angles, including financial. And what was especially frustrating is that it's no coincidence that Paul Beeston, he didn't just preside and was the architect over their success from the start. But in coming back during the Alex Anthopoulos era, it's no surprise that they made the playoffs again. That Anthopoulos gambit, and that's all it was. Let's call it for what it was, Ed. The Anthopoulos era was an example of great intentions that didn't work out, and then a little bit of blind luck kicked in. And what I mean by that is getting Troy Tulowitzki and David Price were the result of Alex Anthopoulos meeting with Paul Beeston and saying, "Sir, would you mind terribly if I do something that will really anger the people who actually pay the dollars and cents for this budget?" Because we now know that what he did would not have been approved or couldn't have been approved unless Paul Beeston stepped in and used his influence as the president of the club. And as a result, they received not one, but two playoff runs after 23, 24 years of futility. And again, it was because of good baseball people. But then to dismantle it the way they did, I mean, I hate reminiscing on this because it seems to me as plain as the day that it happened when Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins arrived and made the argument that we're going to try to keep the window as open as long as possible. They didn't actually make an effort to keep it open. They let it close. They literally let it close. They had the opportunity to do it. They could have done it by keeping certain players or re-signing certain players. It's obvious that they caught lightning in a bottle by getting Josh Donaldson in his prime. And when you get an MVP caliber player in his prime, you've got to use his power years before he starts declining again. And they wasted that opportunity. Man, I think back to even the series on a logistical level and what would have happened had they made the World Series, Ed, because I think they could have won it all in 2015. And that would have created an interesting divergence for how Mark and Ross would have run the team, because now instead of dismantling it at breakneck speed, they'd have no choice but to keep it together because, I mean, you win a World Series, you buy 3 to 5 years of brand new fans that come in droves to support the team. But instead, it petered out. They didn't put enough fuel in the engine, and then they let the whole car just run off the cliff and rebuilt it from scratch. And so now the revisionism begins for these older fans like you and I who are longer in the tooth to be told, you see, we knew what we were doing all along. Oh, come on. That's absolute garbage. They had no clue what they were doing. They got lucky because of Anthopoulos' decisions to go after a Vlad. I'm trying to remember if Bichette was an Anthopoulos call. Do you
Yeah,
remember that?
both
Okay.
Bichette and
And Biggio as well?
As well.
Okay, so let's be clear. The nucleus of today's team that Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins are taking credit for was because of the guy down in Atlanta, right?
Yeah,
Anthopoulos.
yeah.
So that tells me that this whole business is bizarre. Uh,
So was
there's no humility. There's no humility for them to go around being hoity-toity and saying, "You see, it was worth putting you through 3 to 4 years of not just bad baseball, but like AAA baseball." I'm sorry, but the Toronto Blue Jays between 2017 to 2019, those 3 years were worse than watching like Major League Baseball, the movie, and the first 20 minutes when you see like Willie May Hayes striking out, or you see. All those other players struggling. And what was that name? Barreto with the uppercut swing. Um, like it was like Bull Durham. It was like a joke. And it was so insulting to those of us who are in media and in journalism who are watching it and realizing that the fans are really being taken for granted. And I hate that. That's where I almost want to see a fan union. I'd gladly start a fan union to represent those fans who get taken for granted as badly as this regime did in the early days. And now the
I,
revisionism is that they knew it all along.
I'm telling you, for about 3 years, I would go to the ballpark and I said, "How can I say they lost again?"
But how? But it's how they were
Word.
losing. It was like, first of all, no defense to speak of because they didn't have a system in place to help train the kids. They were all being given these $1 million bonuses in the minors, right? Like Guerrero Jr. didn't even lift a weight until last summer. He never even conditioned his body to be a baseball player. But they got lucky. They got lucky because Biggio and Bichette care about training and conditioning, and they're going to be really great players. Bichette, I think, is going to be lights out. Listen, they could easily find themselves going deep into the playoffs this year, and for the type of leaders that a Mark Shapiro and a Ross Atkins. You see how I'm vacillating between his name? Because half the time I'm calling him what should be his name, and half the time I'm calling him what he's decided his name should be pronounced as.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's my plight. But
So
you made a great observation, Ed. That's so true. It's quality of leadership. It's not the corporation behind them. But at the same token, you can't enjoy quality leadership if Anthopoulos is handcuffed. Think about it. Think about those blockbuster trades he made in 2012 to try to get the team on the right track. Those were actually really good moves. They just didn't work out because a Josh Johnson was an absolute dud and an R.A. Dickey could not repeat a Cy Young year at the age of 37. Which,
well, I'll give you the Dickey situation, but Dickey at the end of the day helped. Well, he molded a future Cy Young and a future Hall of Famer in Stroman that won't do it with our team, but will do it with the Mets, most likely.
oh, don't even get me started on Stroman. It's too early in the morning to get this incendiary with my appreciation for a classic example how to misuse an asset that you inherit. Marcus Stroman, for better and for worse, was always going to be a firecracker off the diamond. But can you name another pitcher, maybe going back to Roy Halladay, who could like walk up on that mound and take control and want to literally will you to victory? I mean, those are the kinds of players that inspire young kids to want to become pitchers, not these, Trevor Bauers who just constantly find ways to be very toxic in the way that
And
they're
and
appreciated.
it goes beyond because uh, he's not just a great player; he's a great asset in the clubhouse. Always a smile, always talking to everybody, telling them, "Don't worry, guys, we'll get better.
That's
Uh,
it.
will come. Our day will come,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll be the best." So going now to there, now we get the story that came out last night from Associated Press. Another opportunity lost for the Toronto Blue Jays to add to their bullpen and add to their starting staff in Tijuan Walker, who we had in the team a year and a half ago, and we let him go because there is no potential there. So now he's with the New York Mets next to Marcus Stroman or on a
It,
2-year deal, $20 million deal. And it's another opportunity that we've had to bring back a guy that wants to come back to Toronto because he loves the city.
I wish I could be a fly on the wall. I mean, remember 3 weeks ago when Liam Hendricks came to Toronto to speak with the Blue Jays brass, a former player that they knew had found a way to catch his own lightning in a bottle. What is it? 13 strikeout per 9 inning ratio, some insane numbers, and he ended up going to the Chicago White Sox. Like, why would you want to go to the Chicago White Sox over the Toronto Blue Jays unless there are obviously reasons that we'll never truly understand? But listen, that's not fair. There could have been a lot of reasons. He didn't want to live in Canada, tax issues, COVID, who knows? But the fact that he met with
Well,
Mark, the fact,
he didn't have to live in Canada because
well, that's it.
playing in the
That's it.
States.
Exactly. That's my pre-COVID mentality working there when I analyze why players don't want to why they don't want to play for the Toronto Blue Jays, but they failed to do it. And I agree with you. It's a shame because this is the second year in a row that they've made a major move. And that should at least be, for whatever it's worth, applauded. I personally don't think it's that big a deal because I think as a baseball club, you should always be trying to improve yourself through free agency. I think what's happened in the last 10 to 15 years in this market with the way we look at free agency has completely twisted why it exists. Because if you know that all you need to do is spend money to get George Springer, such a refined player, to come here and play, as opposed to having to roll the dice to develop and create a George Springer in the minors, that's huge. I still think I didn't talk about this as much, Ed, because I didn't think I'd get a lot of mileage. I really probably should have, but 31 years old, outfielder, the cynic in me isn't thrilled. I'm still willing to acknowledge it's George Springer. I have no problem with that. But the fact that he's 31 is a shame because you're basically paying a player at this point for what they've done, not an expectation that they will give you what they've done in the past, because statistically, they're not supposed to become better. They're supposed to start dropping off. But this is modern day baseball. And you've got to act quickly. And you've got to create a window for yourself. And they did that for 2 years in a row. They went out and got a great pitcher and they went out and grabbed a great positional player. So I agree with you. Finish it off now. Make sure you've got the right kind of small bullpen relief you need, because we've seen in this market, how many years have we seen clubs that have, put together interesting pieces and then they've lost games in the seventh, eighth, and ninth innings because they don't have the right closer or they don't have the right bullpen. And if you kind of think of the last 4 or 5 closers that the Blue Jays have had, they've all been good quality closers. They've just been either mishandled, misused, or they've just been misanthropes. They just haven't cared about winning. I don't know what to tell you.
Well, let me rephrase that because we you were talking about the olden days when the games were 7 and 8, 9. Now it's 4, 5, 6, 7.
Isn't it crazy? I so regret that that's what's
We have
happened
we
in
have gone to
baseball.
recreational baseball, not professional baseball.
Well, no, exactly. We've gone to goldfish baseball.
Pick up
Call
baseball.
this what it is. This is goldfish attention span baseball. We now know that the average young fan is probably going to get bored very quickly. So what baseball's done is it's tried to micro analyze itself and basically start dissecting itself into bite-sized quantities for people to be able to deal with, which is a shame because maybe, who knows, maybe it's because I'm older and I enjoy taking a nap once in a blue moon. But at the end of the day, I like a relaxingly long baseball game. I don't mind if it goes 15 innings. I don't care if it's 4 hours. That's part of the enjoyment. They've completely destroyed that. Now they're basically saying, we want the game to be over after 9 innings. And if it's not, we're going to start putting a runner on second. We'll try to get it done as quickly as possible. For me, that's exactly what it is. It's recreational baseball. It's tinkering with a time-honored tradition. And you know what it's really doing, Ed, is it's absolutely destroying the value and integrity of statistics, because the way that we're creating these analytics now for baseball are taking away from what it used to be, which is like remember, it was
The
the
enjoyment.
smell test, the eye test, the enjoyment. Exactly. I would look at a Darryl Strawberry and I would say that's an elite player because I would watch him and I would see him play. But by statistical analysis today, it's taken some of the joy and the sweetness out of the game to the point where, well, how many times have I ranted on this subject? The truth is, if you were to give me my choice of spending the rest of my life watching only Hockey, basketball, or baseball, I would never put baseball in that category today, by today's standards. It would make me very sad. I would pine for the days of Ricky Henderson and Dave Winfield and Jesse Barfield.
Now, since we are talking analytics, how do you analyze, how do you compare players that played 9 games to the players of the pandemic era? We are creating a pandemic era now because when you go into the fall, you will have to go by the numbers that you did during this era of seven inning games. There is no 9 inning games. So how do you compare those players that played 9 innings to the players that played 7 innings, and really
You
need,
see, yeah, it hurts baseball that they had to make such profound changes because hockey and basketball and football haven't had to do that. They've had to realign their divisions and
they
create.
adapted.
And exactly, they adapted. Baseball is reinventing itself in its adaptation, and I worry that what it's becoming is a Frankenstein monster of a sport. As simple as that. I think they're in big trouble. I don't think it's a sustainable model to tinker with your own fundamental rules while also coming across as a heartless, soulless sport. They're not doing enough to help the minor leagues. They've got the players donating money to keep minor league baseball affiliates going, Ed. That's wrong. That shouldn't exist. The whole future of baseball rests in being able to draft players that come from these small US and Canadian cities and want to get the opportunity. You can't just simply rely on an international market because if you do that, you'll diminish the value of your own market. You'll have less players wanting to become baseball players. And I think baseball's hurting itself by squeezing too tight. Their revenues keep going up, the attendance is going down. That is a recipe for disaster. That is literally getting less and less value from something that you've enjoyed in the past. When I was 8 years old and I bought a pack of Big League Chew, it came in a big pouch and it had lots of strands of gum. Now I'm in my 40s. I buy Big League Chew. It's a quarter the size. It has 90% less strands. I paid 3 times as much. That's baseball right there. People are paying more than they should, and they're not getting the value in a game. When the Toronto Blue Jays can go 3 straight years pretending to be a minor league affiliate, you're not getting anywhere. Seriously. It's an insult to competition if you're not willing to spend money and invest in players to get better. And that's the kind of world we live in when it comes to baseball. I think hockey's had no problem adapting. Basketball has been amazing. Adam Silver is really lucky to be surrounded by executives and people who are working together to try to make the perception of the league be as accessible as possible. Football's got a long way to go, but the Americans are ravenous when it comes to football, so it seems to get a pass. Baseball's in trouble. I think baseball has a lot of reflection and introspection to do on itself before it can move forward and say that they're going to come out of this pandemic, treat and respect their lore and their game and their analytics the way it should, and expect fans to keep coming back in droves.
I hate to say it, but there the main issue lies on what coming this coming off season, and that's the CBA that had to be reassessed. And before that, I think the ownership has to reassess the idea if Rob Manfred will remain at the commissioner's chair, because this pandemic has, has, has brought a realization that he is not the man he said he was.
Absolutely, Ed. 100%.
And
Rob Manfred needs to move on, and so does Tony Clark. They've got to
you know,
reboot their relationship. They've got to get the right commissioner and the right union heads to sit down and get a grip, get some context, because they have failed horribly to provide the right kind of leadership. It was a problem before the pandemic. All the coronavirus did was expose that the soul of baseball is in real trouble. And until they get some real leaders at the helm, you and I are going to be lamenting what what is and being nostalgic for what was more than we probably should as grown-ass men, as they say.
yeah, like I, I truly think that if the MLBPA and the ownership really wants to succeed, thoroughly look at what the NBA did in solving their issues, and grab us a stronghold and say, let's unite to progress. Let's not fight anymore for what's not there, because you are going to lose a fan base that of generations because of silly arguments over who gets what. And that's the true story of what baseball is today, since the last strike that we had, the last stoppage that we had. And it cannot continue, because if not, the great names will go into history, not because of what they did, but because this league is going to disappear as a whole.
I couldn't put it better myself. Amen to that, brother.
So, with that note, my good friend Ari Shapiro, uh, I have to tell all our audience that this show can be heard on the Spanglish World Radio Network and its affiliates on social media. Please remember to go to our website, SpanglishSportsWorld.com and SpanglishWorld.ca for all the news. There you can read all our columnists. You can download our programming. You can see and hear what you have missed. As well, let me remind you that Spanglish Sports World, watch it, hear it, read it, download it, but especially live it, because Spanglish Sports World is sport, and sport is Spanglish Sport World. In the name of my co-host, Ari Shapiro, my name is Eduardo Harari. We will be back with you next Saturday at the same time and this same channel, Single TV Channel 250, to bring you the best analysis and commentaries of sport as it happens. But in the meantime, please remain at home. Please remain safe during these pandemic times of COVID-19. Until next Saturday, I bid you farewell and have a great week.